There are so many different ways of holding the bass, and I've done videos on a bunch of them, but in today's video, we are going to go head to head with all these different styles of holding the bass, sitting, standing, and everything in between. So if you want to learn what works best, at least for me, you're in the right place. I'm going to go through all of these common methods and rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 based on the following criteria, and we'll start with standing with the straight end pin. Starting off with balance, well, this is frankly not the most balanced thing in the world to me. I actually do play a whole bunch standing with the straight end pin. That's how I typically practice. That's how I often play solos, but I don't think it's necessarily the most balanced. I'm constantly having to check in to make sure that the bass isn't weighing on my thumb too much. And yeah, the bass will fall on the ground if I'm not careful. So in terms of balance, I'm gonna give standing with a straight pin a 4. Leverage, however, is where standing really shines to me, and I am a huge proponent of focusing on the bow arm and the right arm. I was in a master class with Pinchas Zuckerman years ago. I've said this way too many times on this channel, but I remember him saying, think about your bow arm as your bank account. The better it is, the more money you've got in it. So leverage is where standing really shines. You can get your body into the exact optimal position for every note on the bass, whether it's up here, doesn't matter. So leverage is just awesome when you're standing with a straight pin. I give it an 8. Shifting, I feel like I have to include on this because we bass players can really only play 2 notes without shifting or pivoting or changing strings. So we're shifting all the time, way more than our violin, viola, and cello friends. Shifting while you're standing, well, it's a challenge. It's one of the biggest challenges, actually, and wonderful teachers like Gary Carr have come up with all kinds of great exercises over the years to work on shifting. His famous vomit exercise, which he thinks of as more of a right arm exercise, is great. But just shifting with the bass in a standing position, it's a whole body motion, and it's a little bit on the challenging side, especially for an early player. I'm gonna give it a 5. Now, with all of these, there are 2 sides to the coin, and there are some great things about shifting when you're standing with a straight pin, but having to adjust your whole body, especially if you're starting out, that can be a little bit challenging. In terms of comfort, I'm gonna give standing with a straight pin a 5. It is pretty comfortable, and the fact that you can shift from foot to foot, just being standing is a great option, but as you'll see when we get to some other options, there are ways to enhance comfort while you're standing. So while it's comfortable, I am certainly comfortable, it is maybe not the most comfortable, and if you're playing for hours and hours, jazz gigs or long rehearsals, rehearsal concert doubles or that kind of thing, it can get pretty tiring, maybe not the most comfortable standing with a straight pin. In terms of practicality, I give standing with a straight pin a 10, and the practicality category is the extra stuff you have to schlep. There is nothing else besides your bass and your end pin that you need to play standing with a straight pin. So it's very easy. Part of why I still stand with a straight pin is because I am constantly borrowing basses, and I don't want to get too tied into a specific piece of gear that I then have to bring, and I have my checked bag lost and I didn't have it in my carry-on. So I want to make sure that I can play with the most standard setup possible, which is a bass with a straight end pin. In terms of practicality, a 10 for sure. Now in terms of tone, I'm going to give this a 9. This is the most resonant possible way, with maybe a couple exceptions later in this list, but you are touching the least amount of bass with your body. And though it may have more of an impact or less of an impact depending on the bass, as soon as you put your body onto part of the bass, you are going to be muting the bass. When I'm playing like this, in the way that I stand, there are variations of course, but I'm really just touching this corner of the bass with my body. And I find that because I have the leverage, of course all these criteria kind of are intermingled, because I have the leverage from standing, I can really get the kind of tone that I want on every single note. I also love the rooted into the floor feeling that I have when I'm standing, and I feel like I am just projecting my sound out. So for tonal purposes, I really like standing with a straight pin. Next up is standing with an angled pin, and I am going to use the Rob pin. I did a whole video on this. Many people drill holes into their bases specifically for angled end pins, wooden end pins often, but other materials are used. And this is kind of a great training wheel, I kind of think, for the feeling of standing with an angled end pin, although this works great on its own and lots of people are super happy in using this all the time. In terms of balance, I'm going to give this an 8. This, in my opinion, is a significant balance improvement over the straight end pin. And remember, I deliberately choose to play with a straight end pin, knowing all of this, because all of these criteria weigh in here. But in terms of the balance, oh my goodness, that feeling of the weight on the thumb just completely disappears, and I feel that I am just a little more at one with the bass, at peace with the balance of the bass. And the cool thing about angled end pins, and especially this Rob pin, is that you can really configure the angle to fit your needs, your height, the way you like the bass to sit. So yeah, real upgrade in terms of balance. In terms of leverage, I'm going to give this one a 10. It's got the same advantages that the straight pin does, but you can really get your weight over it. And actually, I think it might be a little bit of an improvement over the straight pin, just because I am not fussing around in terms of the balance. And as I'm doing this video, I'm thinking, why don't I use this Rob pin all the time? I might start doing it, but there might be some reasons not to that we'll get to. For shifting, I'm going to give this a 6. It's easier for sure. There is still a little bit of whole body motion, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just some of the things we're going to get into later make shifting just hilariously easy. So there still is a little bit more of a riding a bicycle nature to shifting, but definitely easier than the straight pin alone. Comfort, I'm going to give this a 7. I like it more than the straight pin for sure. I do not get as tired when I'm playing with this pin. It's just standing, maybe not as comfortable. Although I've talked to many people who prefer standing, and I play with many players, even in an orchestral section, that prefer standing, and so it's really to each their own. I just find, especially for ensemble playing, I really start to feel it when I don't have a stool. This is all, of course, super subjective, and everybody's going to be different, but I definitely like the athleticism, the engagement of standing, and I do prefer the feeling with the Rob pin over the straight pin. But I am going to get tired at the end of the day, so not quite as comfortable as some other options, in my opinion. Practicality, I'm going to give this a 7, and that's just because it's another thing to bring around. It's another thing that you got to go through security at the airport. Make sure you have all the parts and so it's great, but it's more gear. And so that's just another thing. When we're going to the gig, what all do we need? Well, this is another thing to bring. It's not big. In fact, it's only marginally bigger than this end pin. So it's just a little bit more space to kind of fit into a bag, and because it's a little bit more of a specific thing, if something were to happen, yeah, you know, just maybe not quite as practical as the straight pin that you can find just about anywhere. In terms of tone, I'm actually going to give this one a 10. I think that this produces the best sound that I can get out of my bass, and there are so many factors in tone. It's something that I haven't gotten into on this channel yet. I will, but like what type of material are you using for your end pin? That can have a tremendous impact, and we will do some super geeky end pin deep dives. Stay tuned. Do you think we haven't done enough yet? We will. We'll do a lot more. But that feeling of getting the weight back on the bass like this really seems to project the sound out. I'm sure a lot of it is the way I'm approaching the bass, and I'll bet if I drilled my bass, that would be even more of a profound feeling and effect. But I do feel like I am getting the best tone that I can get with this. I have the advantages of only touching right here, the advantages of standing, the advantages of leverage, and the advantages of the weight being shifted a bit back and just sending that sound out. Totally a 10 in my book. Now we get into sitting, and I've done a whole video on this stool. It's pretty nifty, and it allows me to do different heights, which is pretty cool. So we will start off with what I call Euro height. This is a generalization for sure. Lots of Europeans sit tall and lots of Americans sit short, but I know a lot of Europeans that sit on a lower stool, sometimes even a drum throne, and there are some advantages to that. So we'll start off with seated, a bit lower, so you can have both feet flat on the floor. In terms of balance, I'm going to give it an 8. I feel like I should give it a 10 because it's balanced. It's just sitting right here, but you'll see that there are some in my opinion, it's all in my opinion, advantages to some of the other methods. But yeah, really no big deal. Leverage. Okay, sitting low, sitting with your feet flat on the floor, you might think, and there might be a case for it, probably is a case for it, that you are able to have your arm a little more over the strings and that you're getting some leverage advantage by kind of coming down a little bit more. We used to call this bazooka style in music school, people who sat low like this. One of the big challenges with this, gotta stand up, is that you really need to anchor that end pin, probably with a strap, or it has to be just like super duper sharp. Otherwise your bass is going to go skidding because you're at such an extreme angle, and there's no feeling worse than your bass skidding around. Everything I've done so far in this video is at a much more up and down angle, so that's really not an issue in most cases. In this position, yeah, you're gonna be likely to skid out. And I also find that while this might seem like it gives you more leverage, I actually have found over the years that being in a more upright position and allowing my contact point where the bow meets the string to be a little bit closer to my body, I find that that gives me more flexibility and actually more leverage. So though it might seem like you're going to get leverage advantages, I'm going to give leverage a 3.5. Shifting, like all these sitting positions are going to be a 10 in my book, or basically a 10, we'll see, because there's nothing to worry about. We're just here. I mean, I can have my thumb completely off the back of the neck. I can shift all over the bass. No big deal. Shifting, vastly simplified when you sit down. Comfort, I'm going to give this a 7. It seems to be more comfortable at first, but for these orchestral size basses especially, I find that I'm having to get over the bass a little bit more, so there's a little bit more potential back strain. Also, just the way I sit with both feet flat on the floor, this corner kind of digs into my rib and I start to get this weird line and just a little bit sore, so it's not the most comfortable in my opinion. Practicality, I'm going to give it a 5 because you gotta either carry this very specific stool, like a low stool, like a drum throne, or you have to be at a venue that has a low stool like this, and that's just another piece of gear to carry around. A stool plus your bass is even more gear than the rob pin plus your bass. So not the most practical, not impractical, but just something to factor in. Now for tone, and I'm sure people will disagree with me, but I'm going to give this a 3. I find that this position mutes the most of the bass. I have my left leg against the bass, I have my right leg a little bit against the bass, and the bass is kind of just like pointing up. So it's just like a kind of a weird way to project sound outward, and I feel like I'm producing less sound. I feel pretty comfortable, but I actually feel like I'm having to work harder in the right arm to get the same amount of tone, so not my favorite in terms of tone. Now we will go into the high stool positions. This is what I call US stool height, though obviously I know stools of all heights are used all over the world, but this is what I have played on height-wise ever since I was in college. This much more closely simulates the angle that you have when you're standing, which is cool, and it allows me to have my arm a little bit closer to my body, and I feel like, though it might seem counterintuitive, gravity is a little more on my side in this kind of a position. This position, for me, I'm about 6 foot. Maybe if you're taller than that, it works, or you know, lots of factors. But this position for me does not work with my feet flat on the floor. My bass goes so it's pointed like directly out. I cannot begin to play the G string with any degree of comfort. So I need to find a way to deal with that. This stool has a rung, and I'm going to put my foot on that rung. Now the bass is at an angle that I find quite comfortable. And now I can play the bass. And I've played the bass exactly like this for thousands of hours probably in my life. Now in terms of balance, I'm going to give this a 5. It's not as balanced as anything else we've done in this video, in my opinion. And yeah, I'm sitting, but I'm sitting in this angled way, and I can feel my lower back kind of compensating for that immediately. I am feeling the tension radiate up through my body, and if I play a long rehearsal, I'm going to feel the instability of this position. Leverage, I'm going to give it a 6.5. It's pretty good, not as good as standing, and maybe not as good as some other things we have coming up here. I do like that it feels a lot closer to standing. That's cool. It's just not as optimized for finding the perfect contact point for every note. For shifting, yeah, gotta give it a 10. It's just super duper easy, and again, all sorts of caveats all over the place in this video. There are advantages to standing and shifting technique. They're more on the advanced side. So I'm thinking if you just pick up the bass and you want to figure things out, or maybe you're your first year into bass or a few years in, there are just less variables to consider when you're sitting. So this angle I find much more comfortable. I can stand up, and I have the balance issues with standing, but I am able to shift with no problem at all. Comfort, I'm going to give this a 4. It's comfortable enough, but this leg in the position here on the rung gets old in a hurry. I find myself constantly standing up when I have a stool like this in rehearsal and sitting down. And again, I use stools like this all the time. If I have a standard here in the US height stool and I didn't bring any other gear and I want to sit, it's a lot of ifs, I will sit with my foot on a rung. I just know that I'm going to kind of get tight, so I will make sure to swap my feet from side to side, put my right foot, even though I don't play this way, just to kind of even things out, stand up, and just make sure that everything can unlock. Practicality, I'm going to give it a 7. You will find stools at this height much more frequently. They are at just about everywhere that has musicians rehearse, in my experience. So yeah, really not a problem finding these stools in a lot of cases. Much easier to find here in the US, at least in the low stools, but it's another piece of gear, and it's actually a taller piece of gear than the low stool. So not impractical, not the most practical, which would be just showing up with your bass, or the most practical would be going to a place where your bass already is and you just walk in like nothing. Tone, I'm going to give this a 4. To me, my body is muting the bass not quite as much as in the low position, but there is a little bit of that factor. I can feel those vibrations going into my left leg, which means I know they're not going out into the audience as much. May have a big impact, depending on your bass, may have less of an impact. So everybody's instrument is going to be a little bit different, and the way that they approach it is going to be a little bit different. But yeah, it's muting it a bit, and I just am not quite as optimized in the right arm as I am standing. Now, sitting with something that allows you to put your foot flat on the floor. And these days I'm using a yoga block. I used to use a guitar footstool, and people have left comments about that, which is great. And leave any comments on what you use below. That would be great. The cool thing about the yoga block is it's easy to find. It's not going to start squeaking after you use it for a while, and I'm not going to knock it over during slow movements. And all those things have happened with my guitar footstools, but my teacher in college used a guitar footstool. I've used one for years. And having both feet flat on the floor, even if they're at different levels, really seems to make a huge difference in terms of balance and comfort. So in terms of balance, I'm going to give this an 8. It is a massive improvement in my mind over the foot on the rung. All of a sudden, I feel so much more on lock. The bass is in a great position, but I don't have any of that tension radiating up my body. Leverage, I'm going to give it a 7. It's pretty good. It's not quite as good as standing, but it's almost there. And yeah, I feel like I'm really able to get what I want out of the bass. By the way, this is how I sit almost 100% of the time when I go sub with the San Francisco Symphony or that type of playing. If I'm maybe rehearsing 5 hours a day, sometimes 4.5 hours a day, or 2.5 hour rehearsal plus a long concert, the fact that both feet are flat on the floor has been a game changer. Shifting, it's a 10. I'm sitting, no problem. Zipping up and down the fingerboard. I can think about whatever, no problem. Shifting, very, very easy this way. Comfort, I'm going to give this a 9. This is pretty darn comfortable, and the fact that I can just stand up, I can put my foot here, it's not really that big a deal. It seems to be just high enough, 1 yoga block, some people use 2, to make a tremendous difference. I feel super duper comfortable this way. Maybe part of it is because I play this way a lot, but I find that this just really checks so many of the boxes. Practicality, I'm going to give this a 4.5. Only because it's another piece of gear. It's not that heavy. It is easily replaceable at your local dollar store, but now I have yet another thing to remember. I need a stool now, so unless there's a stool at the hall, which there might be, I have to bring this yoga block. It's light, but it's big. It takes up an entire pocket on my base case, and that's just one more thing to forget. And in terms of tone, I'm going to give this a 7. It gets great sound. It has the same muting disadvantages I find as the rung on the stool, but my body's a little more comfortable. I'm a little more loose and resonant and free. Finally, I'm going to use Petra Yuga's super cool ErgoBass. It's like a shoulder rest, but for the bass. I've done a whole video about it, which I will link up to here. I got a comment on that video that I didn't show how this goes on the bass. That's how it goes on. It also comes off the bass really easily, but not when you want it to. You definitely don't want to carry the bass with it. But to get it off, you just pull and it comes right off. Also, the ErgoBass is amazingly configurable. There are so many ways that you can dial this in to just get it right for your bass and your body, and brilliant invention. Easy to carry around, maybe some disadvantages as we get into it, but yeah, just absolutely can't say enough good things about the ErgoBass. Balance, I give it a 10. This, to me, combines the advantages of standing. I feel like I'm standing, even though I'm sitting. I feel like I have that athletic kind of leverage while sitting. And this is the only position in which I really feel like that. I do feel loose and free when I use the yoga block. I do feel a bit tight when I put my foot on a rung, especially if I'm not careful. This gives me that stability of sitting, but it feels like I'm standing. Leverage, I'm gonna give it a 9.5. It is almost as good as standing. It feels great. There's just that freedom that I don't quite have when I'm standing. Maybe I don't want that freedom because that freedom comes with drawbacks, but the fact that I am sitting down, even though I feel the most active in this position, it's just not quite where standing, especially with that angled end pin is. Shifting, it's a 10, I'm sitting. Comfort, this is a 10. This is super comfortable. I am sitting, I'm chilling, I'm active. I don't have to compensate with my foot up on anything. My feet are flat on the floor, but I'm sitting up, which is what I like. It gets the bass a little bit more out, which I like. It gets the contact point a little closer to my body. I'm able to really use the weight of my arm, and I'm so dialed in terms of comfort. Practicality, I'm gonna give this a 3.5. It is not heavy, and it's not that big, but it doesn't really quite fit into any of the pockets on my bass case, so I found that I had to put it into my backpack. It is it's another piece of gear. It's the largest piece of gear in terms of, besides the stool, in terms of the yoga block or the rod pen or anything like that, and it's probably not something you're gonna be able to pick up at your local convenience store or dollar store if you lose it on the road. It's practical, it's just another piece of gear. So now we have stool, bass, and ErgoBass. And it's all about what's most important for you. Do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages of taking another piece of gear? In many cases, yes. And every time I put this on my bass, I think, why don't I use this all the time? And in terms of tone, I'm gonna give it a 10. I think that it has all the advantages of standing, and the reason why I think this warrants a 10 is I could also use an angled end pin. Oftentimes we can get a shorter angled end pin as well as a longer one for standing, or with the rod pin you can adjust it. So it is possible to use both and get every single thing that I am happy about with these different positions. I am muting the same tiny little corner of my bass when sitting, and that's all that's touching my body. So it's the same benefits as standing. And I think that the tone is just as good as standing, in my opinion. Even once you find your preferred way of playing, you got to figure out how to stay comfortable and not ruin your body. If you want to learn more about that, check out what we've got linked up here.